This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. This week on Antisocial Politics, we're joined once again by Stephen Michael Davis. How's it going today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Holding up all right. Just trying to get by. Life is what it is. So,
Sure.
You've been doing a bit of a series for you launched a series with Actual Justice Warrior a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to kind of bring you on to talk more about that because it seems like you're going to be building it for a bit longer into something larger.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the plan. Yeah. So the first video, Sean was gracious enough to let me post it on his channel, and it's about the overarching theme of the series is about how Bernie Sanders wasn't really robbed in the Democratic nomination in 2016 or 2020. So yeah, the biggest problem I've had is thinking about how I'm going to write this. I start off with what happened on Super Tuesday, basically the day before it specifically, and it was the 1-year anniversary of that when, that was supposedly where everything went wrong because. What do we call it? Amy Klobuchar dropped out and endorsed Joe Biden, and Pete Buttigieg dropped out the day before. But that Monday, he endorsed Joe Biden, and it looked like Bernie Sanders was more or less cruising to the nomination. Joe Biden had only won one state, and then Super Tuesday, basically that was the beginning of the end. And in that video, I basically clear up a bunch of misinformation that leftists have been spreading about. And I want to continue to do that, but I also have broader themes within the framework. There are certain lessons about politics in it. For example, I think it's very much a demonstration in how weak our political parties are. Have you heard this before? We live in an area of strong partisanship and weak parties.
I haven't heard that sentiment before, but that makes sense.
So if you... One of the things I want to do is I want to compare the 1968 Democratic primary to like 2016 and 2020. Now, I don't know if you know the significance of 1968, but that was actually
the Chicago riots.
Yes, that's what they're most known for. And the reason why there were those riots is because Hubert Humphrey was named at the convention as the nominee, despite hardly running in the process at all. Eugene McCarthy had way more delegates. Bobby Kennedy had gotten assassinated. So it was a very tumultuous time. They didn't know who the nominee was going to be going into the actual convention. And so they named Hubert Humphrey, who was the vice president at the time, to be the candidate. And that was the last time where the process wasn't democratized at all. They started to democratize it after that. In 1972, George McGovern became the nominee because he won enough delegates beforehand. And it's just been that way ever since. Most people don't know that. Most people just think that forever we've been having this process where we have primaries and caucuses and they pick up delegates along the way, and we know the nominee going into the convention. That's not true. And so that, along with a number of other things, have really stripped the institutional power away from our political parties. And that's something that people just don't know about. People like to think that they're, the DNC is in the smoke-filled room deciding who the nominee is going to be. It's, in 2016, 2020, I think are demonstrations of how incompetent these people are. They're just not good at what they do. Two, that they really don't have a whole lot of options at their disposal to put their thumb on the scale. The process, more or less, voters are deciding who the nominees are. It's not like it used to be.
Did you see Trial of the Chicago 7 last year?
I did not.
Okay, because that was all about the riots of the 1968 election, and it's by Aaron Sorkin, so it's horrifically sanctimonious and self-serious, and it's all about the power of the people speaking up against the violence. And it's I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts on that are, I don't think it's overly sympathetic to the far left narrative, if only just because a lot of the a lot of the far leftists who reviewed it called it boomer lib. Like it's like, oh man, these people are, there's so much nostalgia for the 1960s. But what is your what do you think that the proper what am I trying to say with the last year's election specifically?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think was to what degree do you think that they're justified in their claim that Bernie had it stolen? Because you did mention in your video that there were circumstances that were somewhat on his side.
So 2016, I think they have a lot better of a case, but my position is that it doesn't matter. And I mean two things by that. I don't think in 2020 or 2016, the DNC or anybody else did anything that would have changed the outcome. But I also mean that it doesn't matter in that as long as the Bernie Sanders people don't get the result they want, they're going to cry rigged.
Yeah.
There was more unfairness in the 2016 primary. You had this joint fundraising agreement with the Clinton campaign and the DNC. Hillary Clinton got 2 debate questions beforehand that we know about. And then, but basically she had all the institutional backing of the Democratic Party. Again, I don't think that dictated the outcome, but there are legitimate grievances.
Sure.
In 2020, the Sanders people basically have nothing, which is why I started off with the Bloody Monday episode, because this is their big thing, is that Obama orchestrated the Biden to be the nominee. It's like that really didn't happen, and this is your big Trump card. It's like, that's pretty weak sauce. So I mean, I guess my position is that some legitimate grievances in 2016 really don't have anything in 2020.
I mean, Sanders' coalition technically shrunk between 2016 and 2020. I mean, part of that had to do with, obviously, that Warren was drawing from the same base to some degree. But raw numbers-wise, he got 13 million votes in the primary in 2016, and then that cut by 4 million down to 9 million votes. So he just... I don't know why there would be a lack of enthusiasm there. It's supposedly what I keep hearing is that Bernie voters just don't go out, or Bernie supporters in general just don't go out and actually vote for him, which there might be truth to that, where there's like 10 million Bernie supporters who just like don't leave the house or do things at all, which might be funny in a way that I find self-flattering. But I'm curious as to what might have dulled his movements between there, if he just peaked, or if there was a significant desire to push against the movement within, not necessarily within the establishment, but within the party itself.
So I'm really glad that you asked that, because there actually is a pretty good answer to this. One of the overarching themes, in fact, one of the conclusions of the series, I guess I'm giving the end away here, but like I said, this is not going to be written in a linear fashion by any means. 2016 was like when Bernie peaked. That was actually very much the ideal set of circumstances. He had one opponent, that was it, and someone who was not very well liked in Hillary Clinton. And so the theory is that, and they sort of realized this after New Hampshire in 2020, that Bernie peaked, and they realized that they were not getting the white working class support that they had gotten in 2016. And it turns out that, that was just an anti-Hillary Clinton vote. And those people were going to Bernie Sanders, not necessarily because they agreed with his message or anything, but because they didn't like Hillary Clinton. Turns out, lots of people don't like Hillary. Where is I going with this? So there's a book that just came out. It's called, the title is Lucky. It's by Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes. It's one of those campaign biographies, and I love those books, and this is a particularly good one. But basically, after New Hampshire, which Bernie Sanders won in 2020 and 2016, they go inside the campaign, and according to that book, Faz Shakir had kind of realized that Faz Shakir was Bernie Sanders' campaign manager, kind of realized that, this is the best we can do is get this percent of the states. We just need more people. We just need to keep the field fractured. Then we'll ride. I forget how much he got in New Hampshire that time around, but it was barely more than Pete Buttigieg. So basically, they knew that they were gonna need a fractured field as long as possible, so that Bernie could eke out these pluralities and build enough delegates into the convention.
I remember did you read the book Shattered from 2016?
Yeah, it's by the same people.
Really? Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So what do you sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. Do you think what did you think his prospects were actually going into 2020 then?
It seemed like on paper he was in a pretty good position, and then maybe that's just because I'm too into the progressive bubble. I'm not a progressive, but I look into it, and because he had name recognition, it seemed like, and he was posting these massive fundraising numbers, and there was sort of this anecdotal evidence. It was like, he was the guy who came in second last time, so he's in a great position this time around. And so it seemed like he was, well on his way to at least contending for the nomination. Turns out it was a blowout. But again, I think in retrospect, we realized that 2016 was his ideal set of circumstances, and that, if only he could run against Hillary Clinton all the time, well, then he'd do a lot better. Turns out Joe Biden is a much more formidable opponent than Hillary is.
That's interesting to think of. Part of it, I imagine, just comes down to the fact that Biden is just much less culturally threatening than the Clintons in a lot of ways. Yeah. Where, he was just so inoffensive.
Yeah. He's definitely from a different political era where it's like, he's not one of these woke guys because he's constantly putting his foot in his mouth. But and so he doesn't come across as threatening culturally. He kind of has that working class appeal. I think it's more or less fake, but he's got my dad was in Scranton, then he lost his job, and now I'm in Delaware. I think that's bullshit, but some people buy it.
There aren't many people that remember it now, but do you remember his ill-fated 1988 run where he plagiarized someone and
Well, I was not alive then, but yes,
that's the thing. I don't think many people our age necessarily remember it all that much, but it's funny. And I was talking to a book reviewer recently on the podcast, and he's like, in 1988, I was writing articles about how Biden was this upstart liar, chronic liar, who's just one of the most deeply cynical people in Washington, and turn around to 2020, and now he's the leading candidate. And
yeah,
depending on your opinion, that's either a good thing or a bad thing. What is your thought for where you're taking the next episode then? What is your immediate takedown?
So that book, the book I mentioned, Lucky, I was surprised by how soon it came out. It came out literally the day I released that video, which was just about a month ago. And that's just 3 months after the election, more or less, which is, obviously they had a quick turnaround. But there was a lot of reactions from progressives about it. And again, I think it's they really misinterpreted the central message of the book. And honestly, they just got some things factually wrong. So I'm going to go over that book, the conclusion I draw from it, and compare it to the conclusion that progressives draw from it. The overarching theme of the book is in the title. It's Lucky. Joe Biden really did Mr. Magoo his way into the Democratic nomination. It's extraordinary. He got all these mistakes and stupid things that other people did inadvertently helped Joe Biden, which is interesting because, if you hear the narrative kind of here on YouTube, it's that, the DNC installed Biden. And it was all this elaborate plan. It's like, no, these people didn't know what the fuck they were doing. And they knew they didn't want Bernie Sanders as their nominee, most of them. But everybody else thought that they could be the anti-Bernie guy. And then eventually just some people realized that Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar realized that they weren't going to be the nominee, and they had leverage at the point, so they nominated Joe Biden. And like, it's interesting because Crystal Ball, who read the book, as I understand, she said that the first half of the book could be described as the plot against Bernie Sanders. And when I read the book, yes, it's very clear that a lot of people within the party don't like Bernie Sanders, not just for ideological reasons, but because of his holier-than-thou attitude when it comes to negative campaigning, and the fact that he's never really institutionally been a Democrat, and that matters to these people, like it or not. But it's like, yeah, there were people who didn't want him to be the nominee, but what they make very clear is that they really didn't have the power to stop him. And it just so happened to be that Democratic voters also didn't want him, which is why when it basically was down to him and Biden, with Bloomberg along the way, they overwhelmingly voted for Biden.
Yeah, I mean, it maybe I can. What is the? I would assume that leftists generally kind of have like the 4D chess view of the Democratic Party that the Trumpkins seem to think of Trump, where they're just in complete control of everything, and everything just happens to be going in the same direction all the same time.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, 2016 is a story of a con man pulling a publicity stunt and accidentally getting elected president. And then 2020 is the story of, as I said earlier, Joe Biden, Mr. Magooing his way into the White House. Like, politically, COVID-19 was super lucky for him. Obviously, it's a very bad thing. But most people seem to agree that Joe Biden wouldn't have won were it not for COVID-19. Like, Donald Trump was cruising to re-election. Obviously, it's easy to say in retrospect, but it seems to be like that. But yeah, people... I think if you read these campaign biographies, it becomes very clear that never ascribe to conspiracy what is best explained by incompetence. It's like there's no central authority deciding everything. This is just human beings making terrible decisions along the way, and we ended up where we were.
Well, you've kind of cut your teeth on YouTube specifically doing anti-Young Turks videos and anti-progressive videos. Why do you specifically go after them then? I mean, in the last year, there's been a bit of a caveat where you're also going after Trump people too. Like, sure. What is it specifically about the Young Turks and that crowd that you go after them?
I mean, I think first of all, I'm definitely further away from them politically than I am necessarily, traditional conservatives. I'm definitely closer to traditional conservatives. Also, let's be real here. One gets more clicks than the other, so can't forget that. But it's not just that they sort of make stuff up. It's that even if you take what they say at face value, it still doesn't add up. So, like, again, going back to the Bloody Monday narrative, let's say that Barack Obama did call Pete Buttigieg and did call Amy Klobuchar and told them to drop out and endorse Biden. Okay, people still voted the way they did. If that's all it took to derail Bernie Sanders' campaign, then it turns out he's a shitty candidate. Like, even if you take their conclusions as they say they are, there are implications in those that really undercut their worldview generally. Like, what the go-to they're going with now, especially Cenk Uygur, is that, the media this, the media that. People would have voted for progressives, but the media tricked them. It's like, okay, well, you knew what the media was. Let's just assume that it's true the media hates progressives. Well, you knew that going in. And if the media is that important and really decides who wins and loses, then if the media hates progressives, then progressives aren't electable. Because one of Cenk Uygur's big things is that, like, everybody secretly wants progressives, and if a progressive just got a nomination, then they would win in a landslide. So it's just like, I don't know, for whatever reason, going back to your question, obviously, I kind of went on a tangent there. It's that they're so rife with contradictions, and I enjoy pointing out just the various ways in which they make terrible arguments.
Have you ever had the chance to dialogue with them?
Who specifically?
Well, any major, like, progressive YouTuber.
Not really. Most of them are way bigger than me. So they're not likely to talk to me. There was a guy, he was a progressive YouTuber. His name was Polydice. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Yeah, he did a couple weird takedowns on Matt Christensen a couple years ago.
Yeah. He had like 25,000 subscribers, and then he followed me on Twitter, and him and I would DM every so often. Probably would have talked to him at some point, but then he just disappeared. Nobody's heard from him in like 14 months. It's really weird. I hope he's okay. But yeah, he's the biggest progressive YouTuber I talked with.
I mean, I see you going back and forth with random progressives on all the time, like the deep fat fried guys. But I was surprised that you'd never been called up to argue with them.
They don't really have guests on their show, so it's not that I'm opposed to talking to progressives. I would love to talk with them. And a smaller progressive channel just asked me to have a dialogue with them, so I'll probably do that at some point. But yeah, I definitely would. Most of those people don't regularly do debates or just have random conversations with random people.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to see if you could actually make some headway with them, because have you what about the reverse side of that with like the Trumpkin types? How much of a dialogue have you had with them?
Not too much. I don't do hangouts very often or stuff like that. I guess I've talked with Wandering Ruski a few times. You know who he is. He's a Trumpkin. Yeah, friend of mine, friend of ours. But yeah, I didn't talk too much with Trump guys.
You argue with them a lot, but
well, yeah, I tried to stop arguing with people on Twitter just because it's so fruitless. But every so often, they pull me back in. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not too big on doing hangouts and stuff like that. I'm just not that good off the cuff. I'd rather write out a video and get my thoughts clear and distilled, and present them in a way that I think is most persuasive.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same on that regard. It's a miracle I can actually podcast. Have you thought about trying to do more conservative stuff? Because I mean, in the light of the last 6 months of events that have happened, how much have you thought that you needed to kind of tackle some of their arguments?
So there's a few different things that I really want to. Big topics that I really want to go into. Obviously, one of them is the Bernie Sanders thing. I want to talk more about healthcare, because I think our dialogue on healthcare policy is really misguided, and I think that I have a fairly unique perspective on that. I want to go into modern monetary theory. That might be a little too in the weeds, though. But yeah, I'm not opposed to criticizing conservative ideas. I have certainly done that in the past.
But, hasn't Adam Brennan been getting really hard into modern monetary theory recently?
I see what he says on Twitter, and I don't think he buys it. Yeah, but I couldn't tell you, to be honest.
I mean, he wears political ideologies like hats, so it wouldn't surprise me if he's just experimenting with it. But he's had like 3 streams in the last week that have been about modern monetary theory, and I'm just like, oh no, really? we're losing him to the dark side.
So like he buys it or what?
I'm not. I need to listen to it. I think he's probably just working his way through it. But
okay.
I like no. We need to bring him back.
Yeah.
He's already hard on the UBI stuff.
I thought he was for UBI.
Yeah, that's what I mean. He's already very much for it.
Gotcha. Well, I guess those can go hand in hand. I know that.
Yeah, I mean UBI is also supported on the far right as well as the far left. So
sure. Well, I don't necessarily buy the horseshoe theory of politics, but sometimes it seems to be correct.
I mean, I don't buy horseshoe theory, because up until recently, in the last few years, I always said I've never met someone who's so conservative that they become a liberal, and that's how I always knew that the horseshoe theory was kind of dumb, because everyone's like, "Oh, you're so liberal, you're becoming a conservative," and I'm like, I never met the opposite. And then in the last couple of years, I'm like, well, I've definitely met the person who's so conservative they become a liberal. So maybe maybe in like the four quadrants kind of view of politics, that's likely. But it's one of those things where it's like, that theory has always been a little self-serving.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I think I posed this on Twitter before. You might have answered there, but I'd appreciate your thoughts here. Let's assume that one of these guys becomes king of America and they can just do whatever they want. What is the difference between the country ruled by Tucker Carlson versus the country ruled by Bernie Sanders?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Tucker probably leans way more into the moralistic side of authoritarianism.
Mm-hmm.
Bernie Sanders probably leans more into like libertine, like everyone can do what they want, no scruples. But their economics would more or less start to lean into each other and be kind of indistinguishable. I mean, Carlson's basically a Warrenite as of last year, so
Mm-hmm.
I'd want to I'd want to hear what his actual like positive policies are. But I remember when he did his debate with Shapiro, basically he said he's basically willing to bend the economy over rail and basically do whatever he needs to make it like serve the middle class in any way possible. He's a total protectionist.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I honestly think that the only differences would be on specifics, but the principles are the same. Like you said, government management of the economy, which is towards, not necessarily the same thing. Like in the case of Tucker Carlson, it would be stifling the innovation of driverless cars, whereas Bernie Sanders, it would be like the Green New Deal. And I think they do have some differences on immigration, though Bernie wasn't always this dumb on immigration, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, he's definitely been kind of drawn more into his base because his base is very socially progressive and they're very, very hard on immigration issues. That's another problem with Sanders. He doesn't have much of a spine when it comes to issues like that. It's just he's willing to take a stand on things when people support him, but when there's an actual cost to taking his beliefs, he just kind of gets really lax on it. So maybe a Sanders dictatorship wouldn't be as dangerous depending on who does or doesn't support him, but mm-hmm. it really just depends on how didactically these theoretical dictatorships are run. I guess assuming for the sake of argument that they get whatever they want and with no negative feedback. Mm-hmm. So,
well, that's another thing about Bernie Sanders this speaks to honestly his weakness as a candidate is that he'll grandstand about stuff when nobody's watching or there's nothing really writing on it, and then when confronted with it, he kind of puts his tail between his legs. Like when Zephyr Teachow called Joe Biden corrupt. She was, I believe, a campaign surrogate of his at the time. And then he was confronted with it. And according to his logic, campaign finance corrupts people, and Joe Biden takes money from, wealthy people and interest groups and such. Well, then Joe Biden should be corrupt, right? Well, when asked, he was like, no, Joe Biden is not corrupt. It's like, wait, hold on. So if Joe Biden's not corrupt, he's an establishment swamp creature. Presumably nobody's more corrupt than him. So what's the deal here, Bernie? And he just didn't have the balls to call Joe Biden corrupt to his face. I think that was it.
He's got the Dave Rubin too agreeable gene that makes it impossible for him to just call out someone on national stage.
Yeah. That was like, Hillary, I'm tired of hearing about your damn emails. It's like, that was a big issue. You could have pushed that. You would have gotten flack for it from you.
Yeah, she should have just turned to him and said, I appreciate your endorsement right now.
Yeah. And that arguably was the deciding issue for Trump against Hillary. Like, she probably would have won were it not for that James Comey press conference. I guess we'll never know, but yeah, definitely was their Achilles heel, and he chose not to exploit it.
Good grief.
Yeah.
What were we were just discussing? Well, I was gonna follow. I wanted to follow up on one of the things, on one of the topics you were just. Sorry, we jump between a lot of topics right now, and at some point in the middle of that, I was like, "Oh, that's a great thing I should ask him about," and I forgot what it was. But
horseshoe theory, Tucker Carlson, Bernie Sanders.
No, it was just one. It was on one of the individual issues, the economic issues. Just
driverless cars, protectionism.
Oh, we can go into that. You're to what degree is you're obviously you're a libertarian.
Hmm.
To what degree do you think? Well, actually, I was gonna. Yeah, did you watch Kirk Wilcox's video on nationalists and progressives in like coming together?
Yeah.
How much do you think that there's a possibility of like that kind of coalition coming together around the
It's
issue of protectionism specifically?
I mean they might have common cause. It's really given that these certain like what internet personalities or interest groups have really they really are they have very what am I trying to say here? They're really hardline purists, almost, so to speak. So, on paper, you would think that the Tucker Carlson wing of the Republican Party and the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party would work together on protectionism. And I'm sure that there are some people who are willing to do that. I know Kyle Kalinske is always talking about how, let's work on things where we disagree and not work on things where we don't disagree. Well, okay, but if you're going to call Tucker Carlson a white nationalist, as progressives often do, they might be sympathetic towards what he says on protectionism, but they're going to be very unwilling to hop in bed with him and actually do something that might make him look better. Because if they think that your contingency, or if they think that your constituency is racist, well, then they're probably going to be apprehensive against working with you. And other people will look at that as an opportunity to make political hay. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you work with the racist. Ugh, that's no good. So, there's probably more costs with working with somebody like that, even if you agree with them on a lot of areas. So I don't see it happening, but they definitely have overlapping agendas.
Where do you think that bodes for the direction of the country then? Because I on both sides of the aisle, they claim that the other side is not only winning but like absolutely winning,
Yeah,
and that
like
there's like, oh, the white supremacists are taking over America, or oh, the left is slowly destroying America and just completely encroaching, and yet they can't agree with each other on anything. So what do you think that the direction is in light of that? Do you think it's just that the center is going to start drifting towards one side or the other, or do you think it's that there's going to be at some point both sides are going to start kind of collapsing in on themselves?
Well, in a way, I think it's actually worse than you've described. It's not just that each side thinks that the other side is winning unambiguously so. They think that they're winning by cheating. They think that they, cheat in the rule in the war of ideas. They think that they cheat procedurally. Like, I remember I was listening to Jesse Kelly. He's a right wing radio guy. He's almost very nearly called himself a fascist, not quite, but I'm not even joking about that. But he was like, they're talking about Joe Biden's executive orders. And he's like, I think that I look at this and I see, why haven't Republicans done more executive orders? So there are people actively saying to each side to ditch norms, ditch decorum, ditch rules. We've got Democrats talking about getting rid of the filibuster, getting rid of or not listening to the parliamentarian because they think that's what the other guy would do. So we have this race to the bottom in terms of procedure. And where that ends up, I don't know. One of the things that I liked about the 2020 election, me, I voted for Joe Biden. Don't really love the guy. I badmouthed him earlier, but in a way, I think him winning was a stop on the brakes of populism, both in the nomination process, because he steamrolled Bernie, and then he had this extremely narrow victory over Trump. I was hoping it was going to be more decisive because I wanted a repudiation of Trumpism, but in this case, the center did hold. Will it do that forever? It's hard to say. The more and more politics becomes the interest of little minority factions with very hardline agendas, the more it's going to be like it is now. You have these people who are generalists. They come, they vote every 2 years, and they just kind of have wishy-washy feelings towards politics. The less those people matter, and the more the little interest groups matter, the more polarized we'll get. So I'm worried about that.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I'm starting to wrap up on my a book project I've been working on for the past 3 years, and that's out. Then the race to the bottom is ultimately part of my thesis. That
Okay.
at the end of the day, both parties benefit from the bad behavior of their side. Like not and like
Yep.
it.
Politically.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, in a lot of senses, because both sides need that bad behavior to justify their own bad behavior, and
Hmm.
the more we that we lose the ability to for both sides to fall back on virtue, the less able we're able to justify keeping the system together. So my general fear right now is that there's not going to be an out for a long time. Like I think
Yeah.
if Biden if he's good for anything, it's essentially putting a 4 year break on whatever is happening right now. Although
Hmm.
I'm afraid that he's going to get dragged farther to the left, mainly by the people that are around him, and
Yeah.
this and everything that's going to happen in the next 4 years is going to just kind of give both sides more desire to take over and keep trying, and that we're just not going to resolve the tensions that are happening right now. And
Hmm.
at some point, my solution is always just to kind of encourage people to try to look inward and try to realize that they're the ones contributing to it. But at some point, I'm curious as to what kind of how do we fix the problems in society right now. I mean that's a huge that's obviously it's a
Yeah.
huge question. It's not I
We're
don't
not going to solve that today.
no yeah exactly. It's like oh yeah I solved all of Western society's problems on a tiny podcast, but the longer I mean it just feels like the longer we don't actually hit the root cause of what's happening right now, the longer everything's just going to keep spiraling.
I mean, you probably have a good sense of what I think the problem is. I think politics is something that is innately divisive. It is zero sum. Only one person can be the president, which necessarily means the other guy loses. So the more politics takes over our culture, the more it takes over our society, the more that's at stake with each election, the more people are going to be tuned into it, the more people who are going to be driven by it. So I think um, this the best way to fix it is to make politics less and less important. When it's there's this meme about how every election is the most important election in our
Yeah.
lifetime, and in a way that's true because more and more is decided by who the president is. There's more and more at stake. It doesn't have to be that way. We can have life outside of politics where it's not zero sum and where people can actually collaborate and work together to solve problems rather than getting this dog and pony show that is party politics.
Yeah, I mean, I would say part of the problem though is just that there's a general decline in civil society in terms of what we understand that we share together.
Definitely.
I mean, if there's no, I mean, and there's so many cultural debates right now. It's not worth getting into that at the moment. But if at least in decades past, when there was a shared idea of what it meant to have an American identity, then there was always something to corral around, so people knew what they were
Sure.
pushing against and pushing for at all times.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, there's just no one shares anything. Like
Yeah.
nowadays, it's everything's become so zero sum and brittle that there's just nothing holding the ship of state together. And my concern is just that we're gonna keep hitting new lows until we realize that there has to be a way out of that.
Yeah.
And obviously, things eventually self correct because that's just human history. Everything eventually self corrects back to some equilibrium, but it feels like it could be a very long time before that happens.
Yeah. Maybe a Cold War with China will unify the United States. Somehow, I doubt that. It just seems to be the anti-China stuff. Just seems to be more and more room for partisan divisions. Like you have the populist left talking about how we're the problem because we always are, and then you have the populist right talking about how we need to, stop trading with other nations and just shore up our own borders and such. I don't know.
Both of those are ridiculous assertions in light of the situation. I mean, the left's saying like anything negative you say about China is going to cause hate crimes against American Asians, and then the right's like, yeah, we're just going to not engage with the world at all and let everyone else deal with their own problems. It's like, not with China. we don't want to stop being a superpower right now because China will take over everything else.
Right. China did that. China tried to isolate itself and it didn't work out. And now they're doing the opposite.
The moment America if something bad happens in America, I mean, China's immediately gonna invade Taiwan or something. It's like oh well, they're not a threat to us anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're probably running close to the Zoom call time limit. Do you want to just kind of end on what your plans are for the immediate schedule for your series?
So I have a couple of videos recorded not related to the series, and I'm just editing them. They'll be up shortly. I have the script written for my second video of the series. And again, it's going to be centered around the book Lucky, which I recommend you read, by the way, especially if you like campaign biography literature, which I do.
Okay.
Yep.
When do you think that's going to be? When do you think those videos are going to start dropping?
I mean, my new one should be out on Tuesday. I'm thinking 2-3 weeks for the new Bernie Sanders one. So stay tuned for that.
This episode will probably drop afterward because I'm recording a whole bunch of podcasts at the moment because I'm going to be out of state for a couple of weeks this month. So I'll just have a bunch of episodes that are going to be dropping at random times while I'm gone. So by the time this is up, that video should be available, and I will link it in the description for anyone who wants to see it.
Awesome. Yeah, let me know when you post this, and I'll retweet it and such.
Yeah, of course. I always blast it out. But cool. Yeah, I appreciate talking to you. It's been I don't think we've talked online since before the election, so it's good to hear from you.
I think you're right. Yeah, we'll do it again sometime.
Awesome. Have a good day then.
Yeah, you too, bud. Bye.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa Lafira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.